Flashlight is usually the only light source we can control when taking a photograph. However, it has a few drawbacks. It can create intense illuminations in some parts of the image while leaving other parts very dark. Also, it is not available in post-process, and it is very time-consuming and challenging to take every photograph with and without flashlight. Therefore, it is a desirable and challenging task to be able to generate and edit flashlight computationally. When a flash is used to take a picture, both the flash illumination and the ambient lighting of the scene are present. We formulate the flash photography through light superposition property, which means a flash photograph can be defined as an addition of ambient and flash illuminations. We also know that we can model any image through intrinsic components. Intrinsic image decomposition models the image in terms of illumination invariant scene properties and illumination-dependent lighting effects. We can then separate the flash and ambient shade. We define a single color flash shading because the majority of cameras automatically adjust the white balance based on the flashlight. However, most environments are illuminated by lighting of a different color temperature. Therefore, we define a colored ambient shading. Flash decomposition can be defined as ambient illumination prediction or flash illumination prediction from a flash photograph, while flash generation is defined as predicting flash illumination or flash photograph from an ambient image. So we define two inverse tasks, and we can also formulate these two tasks in terms of shading predictions. Now let's take a look at prior work in this field. In earlier work, the usage of flash and no flash pairs was studied. For example, we can use bilateral filtering for noise reduction of ambient image by using the flash image as the guide. We also see flash photograph decompositions methods such as fade and deep flash, which use image-to-image translation networks. We also take a look at the broader problem, which is image relighting. Two very recent methods are EN and OIDDR. EN changes the lighting condition in an image from coarse to fine and has a depth-guided encoder, and OIDDR relates the image by predicting the shading and albedo. We combine and prepare three different data sets. Now let's take a look at them one by one. The flash and ambient illuminations data set has pairs of flash and ambient images from a variety of categories. DPD has pairs of flash and ambient portraits taken with a green screen background. We substitute this background with the indoor images from the fade dataset to make realistic looking photographs. First, we create a binary map which segments the portrait into background and foreground. We then estimate the tri-maps from this binary map. Then, by using an off-the-shelf matting method, we estimate the alpha mat, which gives alpha values to unknown regions of the tri-map. We are able to segment the portraits. However, if we composite them on the indoor images, we can see color mismatch between the foreground and background. Therefore, we color balance the portraits to match the backgrounds and make realistic looking photographs. Multi-illumination dataset has indoor images taken with 25 different lighting directions. One of the directions is direct flash illumination, and the remaining lights are selected as indirect ambient illuminations. We also use an off-the-shelf approach for intrinsic decomposition to make the corresponding albedo and shadings. However, the predictions are not accurate as seen in this figure. For the multi-illumination dataset, this method also takes the median of all of the different albedos to estimate the pseudo-ground truth albedo. Similarly, we generate 10 distinct illuminations by combining flash and ambient of varying intensities from fade and DPD, and calculate the median albedo of all of these illuminations as the pseudo-ground truth albedo. Now let's go back to our tasks. Inspired by previous work, we defined two image-to-image translation methods and we supervise them by L1 loss function. We also observe a cyclic relationship, which means we should be able to translate ambient illumination to flash photograph and back to the original image. Same relationship is true for the flash photograph. These two constraints are defined as two L1 loss functions between the input image and the image after going through the cycle. Here we see the effect of cycle consistency loss for the generation task. With this loss function, the stability of generation and decomposition results increased. This is especially useful for generation, which is a more complex task. Flashlight intensity for each object is dependent to the distance and angle of that object to the camera. We give the depth map as an additional input to guide both the generation and decomposition tasks. Depth maps are estimated from a monocular depth estimation method. We also add perceptual loss function based on differences between the high-level features extracted from a 19-layer VGG network. We add a critic network to discriminate against the result, and we use a Wasserstein loss formulation plus a gradient norm penalty. Here we see generation task has better quality and no artifact after adding the perceptual loss. The decomposition estimation is more realistic by adding the critic. Although we get good results with this setup, we still see some artifacts and wrong illuminations. Therefore, we also take a more physically inspired approach. Now we try to solve these two tasks through intrinsics, and instead of predicting the final image, first predict the shading. We designed two different networks for the decomposition and generation. For the flash decomposition network, we first generate the flash photograph albedo by the intrinsic decomposition off-the-shelf method. We give these two as input to the encoder, which is connected to 3 decoders, 2 for shadings and 1 for ambient color. Our network is supervised by the pseudo-ground truth shadings and ambient color temperature. We then calculate the flash photograph shading, and the refined albedo is calculated by dividing the input image by this shading. The albedo generated for the flash photograph has ambient color in it. Here we also refine this albedo and separate the ambient color by having a loss function on the albedo. By multiplying the refined albedo by the flash shading, we get the flash and ambient illumination. We also add the normal and depth map generated by the off-the-shelf methods as additional input to guide the network. We also utilize multi-scale gradient loss function, which is a loss function on the gradient of images to achieve spatial smoothness and sharp edges. Here we see that by adding the gradient loss, we get a more smooth and accurate flash shading. We also follow similar design for flash shading generation. We first generate the albedo, depth map, and normal map by the off-the-shelf methods and give them as input to the network and predict the flash shading. Then we multiply it by the input albedo and get the flash illumination. The flash illumination is then added to the input ambient to get to the flash photograph. We supervise our networks by L1 and multi-scale gradient loss functions. We add cycle consistency loss here. The generation is the more complex task, and we see that training the generation and decomposition together does not improve our decomposition performance. Therefore, we first train our decomposition network and then train the generation network. Here we see that the cycle consistency loss makes more stable and realistic results. Also, we get more accurate flash illumination in terms of geometry of the scene by adding normal and depth map as inputs. Our estimations are in a low resolution of 256 by 256 pixels. Therefore, we also implement a guided upscaling framework with using ratio images. We adopt the ratio images from fade between the estimation and input image, which ensures that the illumination's high frequency details are preserved. Here we show the high resolution for the decomposition task, but the high resolution for the generation is also similar to this. We generate the estimated illumination and calculate the low resolution ratio image. The ratio and the input image are given to the network to estimate the high resolution ratio. This network is supervised by L1 loss function, multi-gradient loss function, and also adversarial loss. We train our upscaling network on the actual estimations of our generation and decomposition, and therefore this network is also able to contribute in correcting the estimations. Here we see the upscaling on the joint image-to-image translation flash photograph, which gets rid of the shortcomings of estimated illumination and makes it smooth. We also see improvements by the high-resolution method for the intrinsic model estimation by decreasing the specularities in decomposition and concentrating the flash illumination on the center of the image. Here we see results of flash generation and decomposition. We can see that both methods can produce realistic results while the intrinsic estimation is smoother. We also observe artifacts in some cases with the image-to-image method as seen here. We can conclude that the careful network design based on the intrinsic components is effective, and we do not need the perceptual and adversarial loss functions to make realistic results. We utilize three metrics for evaluating our results: SSIM, PSNR, and inception score. PSNR is based on mean squared error. SSIM is based on structure, luminance, and contrast, while the inception score is based on the inception classifier and cares about the quality and diversity of the results. We first compare to baseline methods and we see that we are able to outperform them. Here, we are observing results of flash decomposition for deep flash. Deep flash is an image-to-image translation method without perceptual loss or adversarial loss function. The results are not realistic and the flashlight is not decomposed properly. EN and OIDDR are two very recent image relighting networks and are very similar to us in terms of metrics. However, they both show disadvantages. In EN, although they have three networks to relate the image from coarse to fine, we still see artifacts in both generation and decomposition. OIDDR computes the albedo and shadings like our intrinsic method. However, we see that their shading fails to accurately capture the high magnitude flash shading and causes the flash illumination to leak into the albedo. We also see failure in the final estimations as seen in the second and third examples. Now we look at some of the different results we can get from our setup. We can generate flash illumination with different strengths. Here we see the second example going from ambient to very strong flash photograph. We also take a look at our decomposition results. As the first example here, we decompose flash photograph and change only the ambient color. As the second example, we show here we can alter the two illuminations independently. Thank you for listening.